Welcome to the Work Trends podcast from Talent Culture. I'm your host, Megan Mbiro. Every week, I interview interesting people who are reimagining work. And be sure to check out our Work Trends Twitter chat events calendar located at talentculture.com on the podcast page. Welcome, everyone, to the Talent Culture Work Trends podcast, sponsored today by Radancy Labs. I'm your host, Megan Mbiro, and today we are diving into the exciting world of generative AI, discussing its potential consequences on our work, our lives, and society as a whole. We are thrilled to have a very special guest, Todd Maycunich, the driving force behind Radancy Labs, sharing his expertise on the subject. But before we dive in, let's give Todd a proper introduction and learn more about his background and accomplishments. Todd is the SVP of Radancy Labs, a global insights team leveraging first and third-party data and research to study the trends likely to have the most material impact on the future of talent acquisition. Todd has been with Radancy for 17 years and was named a game changer by Workforce Magazine in 2014. So I am so happy you are here with me today, Todd. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Of course. And where are you today, by the way?
I'm in my home office in the suburbs of Chicago.
Nice. Well, listen, let's get on with it because I know we've got lots to talk about today. The pace of innovation around AI has been unprecedented in 2023. Why do you think this is?
We're going to have to go all the way back to December, I guess November 30th to be precise, of last year. And that's when ChatGPT was released to the public. It became the fastest application to reach 100 million users, doing so in only 2 months. You know, ChatGPT wasn't the first conversational user experience that demonstrated the ability to reason, but it was by far the most popular. And within weeks, we saw it being built into popular products like Bing Search. It was successful in passing the bar exam, the SAT, Wharton MBA exams, being used in courtrooms, etc. And of course, it was being used by students and professionals around the world who found efficiencies in the work that they do.
And you have to ask the popular thing, right? Like, why though? Like, you're right. It was lightning fast in terms of the mass adoption.
AI is already a prominent field of study, of course, and it's, more than a buzzword for investors. It's a key driver of industrial innovations and automations. But these generative AI tools, had people wondering if we were at the precipice of the next paradigm shift in computing. And so I think, tools like ChatGPT captured the minds of people. They were having experiences that they hadn't previously had with conversational bots. And so, yeah, I get it. And I understand the hype.
Yeah, definitely. Let's talk a little bit about some of the risk opportunities for recruiting and hiring, because this is just huge.
Yeah, so like any new technology, when new technology emerges, so do new problems. And that's particularly true when the pace of technology moves as quickly as it does today. I think it's safe to say that I'm not sure what we'll be talking about in 3 months, much less 3 years. But, in the first 6 months or so of studying and using this technology and thinking about it in the context of recruiting and hiring and how we integrate it into our business at Radancy, a few things have emerged. And the one thing I think about a lot is, all of the AI generated content. And how that's the content that's training future iterations of the internet or future iterations of AI. And so in many ways, we're using AI to generate content, which is ultimately training the AI that will in the future generate content. And I think there's some more risks there than opportunities. It creates somewhat of a homogenization effect, which makes it hard to stand out. And that can particularly impact brands.
And to me, that's so scary. Come on. We know that things will get automated, but I just feel like we're taking it too far already. I think it's a wonderful technology, don't get me wrong, but I agree. The risk isn't just recruiting and hiring, obviously. It's going to mushroom. It's everything.
My observation is that there's a lot of energy, maybe not equal energy, but there's a lot of energy around making sure that there are some guardrails in place. And, I think most companies are looking at the policies they need to put in place and think about, how do they protect their brand and their brand voice when, AI is helping generate content. And so I guess the good news is at least we're thinking about it, and at least, companies like ours are integrating it safely into the process, as opposed to being, a little bit fast and loose.
I want to break something down with you just a little bit more. I mean, what happens when technology makes candidates indistinguishable from each other by obscuring certain characteristics or attributes of people? I mean, talk to us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, this is fascinating. In fact, yesterday, Google had their I/O conference, their annual I/O conference, and no surprise, the topic du jour was AI. And one of the things they announced is called Help Me Write. It'll be integrated into Gmail. And the example they gave was a person receiving an email from an airline offering them a credit, like an airline credit, in return or in response to a canceled flight. And this person used this Help Me Write tool, this generative AI tool, to respond to the airline asking for a full cash refund. And, it's not difficult to write an email back and saying, no, I'd prefer a cash refund instead of airline credit. But there is probably a little bit of science to how you ask for it, the words that you use. I imagine some emails get an immediate response and others don't. And so it made sense to me. But actually, I think it was last week that LinkedIn announced something a little similar. They're rolling out AI-powered writing suggestions, which includes a tool that will auto-write an introduction email to a hiring manager using your profile, the job description for the job that you're expressing interest in, and even the hiring manager's profile. And I'm torn here because, as a hiring manager, does receiving these messages make my job easier or harder? What happens when candidates no longer have to do the research on the company, the job, even the hiring manager to write, but instead can just use tools like this to send those messages? And, will this make suboptimal candidates seem optimal? And I think that's a good example of how this technology can sort of obscure or obfuscate what a candidate looks like.
Yeah, that to me is super scary because we, in general, want to hire people in 3D. And in order to look at somebody in that fashion, you do have to see these parts of themselves. They have to see it as job seekers or candidates, and we have to see it as hiring managers and employer brands. So, wow. Just one word, wow.
Yeah, and what happens when this technology is extended broadly to cover letters and resumes and assessments and, believe it or not, even remote interviews? Like, this has the potential to lead to what is sometimes referred to as technological anonymity. And that's where, exactly what you said earlier, it's where technology can obscure certain characteristics or attributes of people. And, that creates all sorts of interesting challenges. The first, of course, that comes to mind is bias. And there's an argument to be made on both sides that this could accelerate debiasing, or it could do the opposite, which is perpetuate inherent biases or unconscious biases. But I think the biggest issue here, the biggest concern here is that, it's plausible that hiring decisions may start to favor culture fit over other factors. And hiring for culture fit can not only slow progress towards DEI initiatives, but also directly impacts the business through a culture of innovation stagnation, or, what sometimes people refer to as groupthink.
Sure. I mean, I think it's a balance. I still think from my perspective, we're still working on culture fit, frankly. But yeah, skills. Let's talk about skills. What happens when the skill level required to perform a particular job is basically reduced by tech?
There was this study, I think it was the World Economic Forum in 2020, took a pretty extensive look at skills. And they said at that time that by 2025, 50% of all employees would need reskilling. I think it was that same report where they suggested that only 0.5% of global GDP was focused on adult lifelong learning. And probably safe to say that it starts with making sure that investments in future-ready education as well as adult life learning programs will deliver outsized returns in the form of productivity, wage growth, and ultimately GDP growth for global GDP growth. But these deep learning tools like ChatGPT, they're reigniting conversations about skills, and not just about the new skills that will be needed, but also the skills we may no longer need. And that's where the term de-skilling comes in, which is, it's not new, of course. You can go back to the assembly line to find examples of de-skilling, but when skilled labor is replaced by technology, you have de-skilling, this issue of de-skilling, and good examples emerging already. For instance, software engineers who were proficient or maybe more proficient in a particular language, they may soon lose that advantage because of the capabilities of generative AI. And the consequences of this, as you know, can be, fairly significant. Like when the skill level necessary to do a job is reduced by technology, labor costs go down, which can have benefits for businesses and consumers in the form of lower prices, and it can stimulate productivity and job growth and, even be a catalyst for entrepreneurship, but it can also widen income inequality gaps.
Yeah, I mean, part of me is like, what else? If we're going to cover all this, how will generative AI impact the authenticity of a brand if GAI is really just offering recycled point of views?
Yeah, we sort of started by talking a little bit about this. It's not just brands that will suffer this homogenization effect. It's effectively all content is under threat. And I saw some academic research recently that suggested that within a few years, as much as 90% of all the content on the internet will be synthetic. And I would probably take the under there, but I get what they're saying, which is maybe the internet that we know today is not the internet that we'll have in a few years. And maybe the vast majority of the content on the internet across channels will be synthetic. But this can really impact employer brands. And generative AI is frankly being heralded for its ability to be creative. There are examples of these tools inventing languages, and people that have played with tools like Midjourney or Adobe's AI tools have seen not just written creativity, but visual creativity. And it's exciting. But, when this content that's generated by AI is published to the internet and then ultimately back into the corpus of data that's training future large language models like the one that ChatGPT uses, what can happen is like once highly imaginative brands whose essence really came through not just in what they wrote, but in how they wrote it. Those brands could regress if they trade authenticity for speed and agility. And so it's a little worrisome.
A little bit, a lot. If you're out there in the work trends community, I mean, we're on the forefront here of staying human amongst all this technology. I'm shaking in my boots, everybody. I'm sure if you're out there, you might feel the same as well. We want to hear from you. Utilize work trends as the hashtag. I got to ask, finally, how should talent acquisition teams proceed from here? Suggestions, advice?
Well, first of all, I think the positives really do outweigh the negatives here, particularly in the short term. I think moments like this, where we're presented with breakthrough technology, it's an opportunity for us, but we must stop and remember what's important and the jobs to be done. And so, our customers at Radancy are the world's largest, most complex multinational brands, and they leverage our talent acquisition cloud to optimize their candidate journeys and to drive lower costs, maximize their ROI by reducing costs and filling their jobs quickly with the best people. And so for us and for our customers, any applications of AI have to first demonstrate that it'll help them improve one of those outcomes rather than become a solution in search of a problem. And so the first thing I would tell anyone in HR talent acquisition is you have to remain outcome oriented before you start thinking about the potential applications of generative AI. And I think the most immediate impact to recruiting and hiring will be in the form of that technological anonymity. And I think ultimately better screening and selection tools, or maybe entirely new ways of doing that, will be needed to truly separate all the candidates, will be largely indistinguishable from each other. But I think the other thing that companies can do now is think about the channels and invest in the channels that historically have delivered higher quality candidates. I think a lot, of course, about your own employees. Mobility programs are key. Help these people inside your company who might be feeling a little bit of stagnation because maybe they're looking at their skill set and realizing that some of these skills won't be as necessary in the future. Give them opportunities to move within the company. But also, channels like employer referrals where there's inherently some trust built into that candidate relationship, that can help you overcome these, what I would consider immediate challenges.
Well, and I love the fact, Todd, that we're ending on a really important note. It's about retention, everybody. So let's utilize this moment to make that even better, right?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, keep your people, but also think about the tools you're using to welcome new people to your company.
Well, I tell you, you have given us so much to think about today. So appreciate you. And thanks so much for stopping by.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to our Work Trends podcast, your favorite source for all that's new and exciting in the world of work. If you love what we do here, make sure to share our podcast with everyone you know. And don't forget to tune in to our very next episode. I'll catch up with you next time. Thanks to listening to Work Trends from Talent Culture. Join us every Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern for a live Twitter chat with our podcast guest. To learn more about guests featured on today's show, visit the show notes for this episode at talentculture.com and help us spread the word. Subscribe to Work Trends wherever you listen to podcasts. Leave us a rating, review in iTunes. Share Work Trends with your coworkers, your friends. Look forward to it. See you next time.